There is a dark, deadly gap in England's history, in 1315, a part no book ever truly tells. My AI has brought those lost fragments back to life. A powerful kingdom suddenly plunged into absolute chaos. No war, no great plague.
So why did the rivers stop flowing toward the sea and instead turn back, flooding villages and swallowing lives?
And why did once healthy children suddenly vanish? And most of all, why did your gentle neighbors begin to look at one another with the eyes of hunters?
Some historical truths are forgotten not by accident, because they are too brutal to be allowed to survive.
Law lost its power, morality eroded day by day, and people were forced to make choices they once believed they would never face. Right now, step with me into 24 hours of the white hell and see how long you would last before realizing the truth. The greatest enemy was never disease, but the person standing right behind you. The birth of the eternal marsh. It begins in Norfolk, eastern England. You wake up. There is no sunrise waiting for you. The first thing your senses register is a drop of icy water, bitter with soil and rot, falling straight onto your face from the collapsing thatched roof above. This wasn't a night storm, not a few days of bad weather. For months, the sky never dried. In rural Norfolk, rain had become part of daily life, as ordinary as hunger and as constant as fear. You don't wake to light. You wake to dampness that has seeped into your bones. Remember this. Since the spring of 1315, the sky has never stopped crying. The AI reconstructs the world around you, a hut with cracked earthen walls, a floor that is no longer solid ground, but a slick breathing layer of mud, thick and clinging, crawling with fleas and worms rising from the flooded earth below. Your clothes never had a chance to dry from the day before and are already soaked again. A dull gray light seeps through warped wooden planks, too weak to bring warmth strong enough, only to expose the truth: another morning has begun, and it carries no new hope at all. Step outside, or at least, look past the threshold. What do you see? Not the endless green of England's legends. What lies before you is a gray ocean of floodwater, swallowing fields of wheat that have collapsed under their own weight, blackened, rotting, sprouting mold directly on the stalk. They are no longer gold. They are the color of decay. The seeds sown at the start of spring never stood a chance to grow. They died beneath the soaked earth, decomposing in silence, taking with them every last hope of this year's harvest. Every step you take outside is a gamble. The mud is thick and grasping, clinging to your feet, as if the ground itself is trying to hold you back. Children are no longer allowed to run or play in the village. The adults know the truth. One slip, one hidden pool of water, masked by dead grass, and a child can vanish in seconds. No cry for help, no chance to turn back. This is not a disaster that strikes in an instant. This is a slow death arriving one day at a time. You are standing on the edge of existence itself. Beyond the doorway lies the eternal marsh. Behind you, inside the hut, hunger has already begun to gnaw at your stomach. If your last piece of bread has turned green with mold from the damp, would you eat it knowing a brutal sickness may follow? Or would you choose hunger, waiting for a miracle from a sky that has never stopped raining? Inside a starving body. The kitchen, once the heart of the home where warmth lived alongside the rich scent of baking barley bread, has now turned into a chamber of deathly stillness. In the suffocating darkness of the year 1316, the entire Kingdom of England is writhing under the grip of the Little Ice Age. Endless corrosive rains heavy with the stench of sulfur have turned granaries into black mold-choked sludge. Even dry firewood has become a luxury, something even the wealthy struggle desperately to obtain. Beneath your feet, the icy mud seeps between your fingers. You reach for the clay jar pressed against the wall, the one that once held your family's last line of survival. Empty, not a single grain left, no barley, no oats. At the bottom of the jar, only a few gray scraps of maple bark and dark fibrous grass roots remain tough, bitter, carrying almost no nutrition at all. You chew, not to feed yourself, but to deceive your body into believing it still has a chance. Feel it, the hard splinters of wood driving into swollen, aching gums. You try to crush them with teeth that are already loosening desperately, attempting to trick a mind unraveling from hunger. The sharp, bitter taste of tree sap floods your mouth, tightening your throat with a pain like a blade cutting inward. In this darkened kitchen, as acidic rain continues to pound and erode the thatched roof above you, realize the truth: you are eating death itself just to keep living a little longer. Outside, footsteps scrape softly through the mud. People no longer greet one another in the morning. They move quickly, heads lowered, eyes averted. Because in a village that is starving to death, every glance seems to carry the same unspoken question: does that house still have something to eat? And the question no one ever dares to voice: will they become dangerous when night falls? Morning drifts on just like every other morning. The sun still struggles to break through the gray clouds. But from this moment forward, your survival no longer depends on the next meal. It depends on how long your body can endure before it begins to consume itself. But hunger will not allow you to lie here and wait for death for even one more second. You step outside and let yourself be swept into the human tide, flowing toward the place where hope and cruelty intertwine. The market square, where a human life is now weighed and priced by crumbs of bread mixed with sawdust. A place where lives are traded for possessions. You arrive in London, but this is no longer the bustling port city you once knew. The market square has become a battlefield of mud, heavy with the stench of rotting refuse and dead animals. Beneath torn awnings, thousands of hollow-eyed people stand in crooked lines, clutching the last pieces of their former lives: a silver wedding ring, a family crucifix. Sometimes even the best clothes they still own, all offered up in silence, hoping they might still be worth a mouthful of bread. No one calls out their wares. No one haggles. The exchanges happen in silence. A buyer opens their hand. A seller hesitates, not weighing the price, but deciding whether the person in front of them is still worth selling to. Here, the economic reality of the famine reveals itself in its most brutal form. Hoarders. The few who still control grain stand behind reinforced wooden stalls, guarded by rough, thick-armed enforcers. Their eyes scan the crowd without a trace of pity, only calculation. The price of grain has surged tenfold, turning money into nothing more than useless scraps of metal in the face of hunger. The cruelty of this black market lies not only in its prices, but in the decay of humanity itself. In air thick with rot and muffled groans, a familiar scene plays out again and again: a frail old woman, having just traded away everything she owns for a final scrap of bread, has it ripped from her hands by a thief. She collapses into the black mud, too weak to cry out her dull eyes, following the figure who has just stolen her last chance to live. This is the moment when the moral boundaries of medieval society are torn apart. Among the crowd that witnesses the scene, a heavy indifference settles in. No one steps forward to help, not out of cruelty, but because the instinct to survive has frozen what little compassion remains. Everyone is asking themselves the same ruthless question: is helping a stranger worth the price of a piece of bread, one that might keep you alive for just one more day? The famine of 1316 forged a reality where heroism became a luxury, and survival meant learning to live with brutality. Chaos ripples through the crowd as rumors spread of a royal convoy approaching the city. But the truth is even more bitter. Even those at the very top of the kingdom are facing the same reality. Gold and silver cannot fill an empty stomach. When royal power collapsed, the brutality of the year 1316 seeped through even the strongest castle gates, crept onto the most luxurious carriages, and proved a merciless truth: before the fury of nature, a crown is nothing more than a useless piece of metal. On the march north towards Scotland, King Edward II's retinue looks less like a conquering army and more like a procession of ghosts. The sky remains a suffocating gray, pouring down unending rain, turning the royal road into a slow-moving river of thick, clinging mud. The lands the army marches through have been strangled by rain and mud for months on end. Grain has rotted where it stood in the fields. The storehouses are empty. The collapse of an empire often begins with political upheaval, but here it begins with empty stomachs. A shocking truth emerges. Even the king, the man who claims ownership of every inch of the realm, cannot find enough food to feed his own retinue. At a stop in St. Albans, the monarch himself is forced to go hungry because even the local bakeries no longer have a single grain of wheat left to turn into bread for him. The most horrifying sight appears among the ranks of the knights, the very symbols of medieval strength and honor. The great warhorses, towering destriers once prized as treasures and trusted companions in battle, are reduced to a final source of protein. With tears swallowed and jaws clenched, the knights raise the same swords that once defended the crown and use them to kill their own horses. They eat the horse meat raw or barely scorched over weak flickering fires that never grow hot enough. The sharp stink of blood mixes with the metallic rust of armor no one bothers to polish anymore. And when the last warhorses fall, the military strength of the kingdom collapses with them. Royal power, once built on images of abundance and control, begins to fracture over the simplest thing of all, an empty stomach.
Power does not fall because of rebellion. It falls because it can no longer feed the ones meant to protect it.
When a king can no longer fill the stomachs of his soldiers, oaths of loyalty become cheaper than the mud beneath their boots. The famine levels every class, dragging servants and sovereigns alike into the same abyss of primal survival. While the nobility wrestles with wounded pride and shattered honor, another enemy begins to rise, quieter and far more terrifying than hunger itself. It does not come in human form, but creeps out from the rotting livestock farms, a disease capable of erasing the livelihoods of an entire continent. Disease within the famine. You leave the main road and step into the farmlands. No one needs to tell you this place once fed the entire village. The evidence is everywhere. Broken fences sagging into the mud, empty stalls yawning open dark stains in the earth where livestock once stood packed together, breathing, waiting, and then dying. At this moment, across the farms of Norfolk, an unmistakable stench begins to take over the air, the smell of mass decay. The reek of rotting flesh mixes with wet mud hanging over the land, like a lethal fog heavy enough to taste impossible to escape. The famine of 1316 does not strike humans alone. It targets the very backbone of medieval agriculture. Rinderpest. The cattle plague is sweeping across the continent like a wildfire. Cows and sheep, the last sources of labor and food, collapse in waves inside waterlogged barns, dying where they stand. The carcasses lie scattered across the farms. Some are hurriedly dumped into shallow pits, the muddy soil too thin to smother the stench. Others are left where they fell. No one has the strength left to dig. Flies swarm. Rats arrive. And with them, disease spreads in silence. The death of animals becomes a bridge for sickness to cross into human bodies. Rotting flesh is left beside places where people still live, eat and sleep, turning homes themselves into vast, unknowing reservoirs of infection. From a medical perspective, this is a lethal trap. After months of severe protein and vitamin deficiency, your immune system collapses entirely. The lungs become fragile, hypersensitive, barely able to defend themselves. In this damp, contaminated environment, an ordinary cold or a simple cough is no longer a minor illness. It escalates rapidly into acute pneumonia or blood infection, and often into a death sentence. In the year 1316, there were no antibiotics, no oxygen, no hospital beds. There was only time, and time was not on your side. The villagers began to avoid one another, not out of fear of contagion, but because they no longer had the strength to care. One sick person meant one more mouth that could no longer work. When someone collapsed in a barn, they might lie there until nightfall.
When the fever did not break, the night seemed to fall faster than usual.
Hunger had already weakened people. Disease merely finished what it had begun.
By this point, famine was no longer just a story of empty meals. It had turned the living environment itself into a slow-killing machine. Contaminated soil, polluted water, foul air, and bodies no longer capable of defending themselves.
And as the sun dipped low over those death-ridden farms, a cold truth slowly emerged. No war or blade was required. This kingdom was disintegrating from within through hunger and disease. In a world where even a single breath could kill you, would you choose to fight on for one more day of survival, or surrender, seeking release in an eternal sleep amid the mud and filth? When the last animals had died, and the air itself turned poisonous, human instinct was driven to the brink of madness. In the encroaching darkness of the coming night, one final boundary of humanity was about to be crossed. The final boundary of humanity. Darkness fell at 7 in the evening. London had no streetlights, only a dense, suffocating blackness smothering the alleys near Newgate Prison. This was a place where mud mixed with blood and despair. In the bitter cold of the night of 1316, fear no longer came from knights or tax collectors, but from your own neighbors. Rumors began to spread through the darkness like a virulent plague. People whispered of prisoners in Newgate tearing into one another the moment a man drew his final breath. More horrifying still were stories of mothers' eyes gone wild from prolonged hunger, who no longer looked upon their emaciated children with maternal love, but with the instinct of a cornered predator. In famine, silence was the only way to survive. The night dragged on. In the alleys around Newgate, there were stories that would never be written down, not because they never happened, but because no one had the courage to tell them. And as darkness swallowed the city whole, a brutal truth was laid bare.
Famine did not only kill the body, it tested the most fragile thing of all, humanity.
The decay of humanity was most clearly revealed in the way people began to see one another. In the darkness of these alleys, a neighbor was no longer a friend or a fellow believer, but a threat or a potential source of food. Trust, the most vital bond holding society together, had been completely severed. In that moment when your own stomach is twisting in blinding hunger, would you turn away to preserve the last shred of human dignity, or step into the darkness as reason fully surrenders to animal instinct? The graveyard of an empire. The night had grown late. Church bells no longer rang to call for prayer they tolled under the weight of death. Darkness spread over the graveyards surrounding the churches of Norfolk and London. But these were no longer places of solemn rest. Under the relentless acidic rain of 1316, the boundary between consecrated ground and marshland was erased. The cemeteries flooded, turning into fields of black sludge where the kingdom's last souls waited for an ending without a name. The dead were so numerous there was no time for farewells, let alone coffins. Graves were dug in haste wider than they were deep. Bodies were laid down in layers, nameless, without prayers, without distinction between old and young. A layer of mud, a layer of people, then mud again. Ashen faces stared up at the pitch-black sky, eyes wide open, as if still waiting for something that would never come. Lime was sprinkled sparingly, not out of mercy, but because it was running out. The stench of death still rose, mingling with the smell of wet earth moss and rotting cloth. The night wind swept through the graveyard, carrying a chill that raised goosebumps on your skin, whether from the cold or from the thought that you might soon belong to this place. No one cried anymore. Tears had dried up days ago. The living worked in silence, as if fearing that uttering a single word would cause death itself to turn and look directly at them. Someone slipped collapsing into the mud, a hand brushing against the cold skin of a corpse. They flinched and pulled back, but did not scream. Fear now was a luxury. You leave. You return to the low, dark room. The stone ceiling hangs so close that your breath condenses into droplets pattering down onto the cold earth floor. A pile of damp, mildewed straw lies against the wall, blackened by seepage and the old sweat of those who once slept there and never rose again. On the weeping stone wall, the imprint of someone's hand remains like a final attempt to cling to life. You collapse onto the straw, too exhausted to remove your shoes, not even bothering to wipe the mud from your hands. Your fingers tremble slightly, not from the cold, but because your body has begun rationing its final movements. Your body feels frighteningly light, as if simply closing your eyes would be enough to drift away. Over by the graveyard, the water level continued to rise in silence, slow but relentless. The graves could no longer hold their shape as boundaries between the living and the dead. They dissolved into the mud, erasing every trace, just like the people of this year of hunger. They appeared endured for a time and were swallowed whole without leaving a name behind. Night closed in. There was no sleep worthy of being called rest, only the weary awareness of someone counting each remaining breath. Dawn would come the next day, but it would not rise over a flourishing kingdom, only over a devastated land. We have passed through 24 hours filled with brutal choices, and a day in the year 1316 closes not with a sunset, but with the fading of the last remaining hopes. This is not merely a slice of time, but the embodiment of one of the darkest chapters in human history, where people were forced to learn how to live when every value of humanity was tested to its absolute limit. The hunger would eventually pass after 3 relentless years, but the scar it carved into the flesh of Europe would endure forever, altering faith in royal authority and in destiny itself. Leave your thoughts below.
How long do you think modern society could endure if a similar catastrophe were to happen again?
The journey into humanity's most brutal hidden corners will continue. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join us as we uncover the next historical case files where the truth is often more haunting than fiction. Thank you for staying with us through a long day in the year 1316. We look forward to seeing you again on our next journeys through time and space.